Hello and welcome to Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Coming up on the program, ECOWAS imposes sanctions on Niger's junta targeting the land borders and the process of governance. We'll be speaking to African Affairs Analyst PoliticsToday on the sanctions and what lies ahead for ECOWAS and for Niger. Plus, our review of the just concluded Russia-Africa Summit in St. Petersburg, Russia. Well, as usual, let's take a quick check on other discussions in diplomatic circles. We'll be right back.
The African Union Peace and Security Council has demanded the Nigerian military to restore constitutional authority within 15 days. In a communique published following a meeting on Friday on the Niger coup, the AUPSC said it demands that the Nigerian military personnel immediately and unconditionally return to their barracks and restore constitutional authority within a maximum period of 15 days. The Council commended the efforts of the Economic Community of West African States, the regional bloc, to restore the calm in Niger Republic. Migrants have continued to cross the Rio Grande River in spite of a floating barrier put in place by the state of Texas in the United States to deter them. Drone footage showed the migrants wading past miles of concertina wire in search of an entry point into the United States from Mexico to surrender to members of the Army National Guard and the Texas Department of Public Safety troopers near Eagle Pass. Texas authorities have begun installing the floating barrier in the middle of the river near Eagle Pass, sparking a diplomatic complaint from Mexico. In recent months, Texas National Guard troops have also strung up razor wire to stop the influx of migrants from Mexico. China is solidifying relations with Nigeria through establishment of the Confucius Institute Alumni Association of Nigeria. Inaugurated in Lagos, the association aims to restore stronger ties between Nigerians who have studied Chinese languages in the country through the Confucius Institutes in the country.
Welcome back. ECOWAS has waded fully into the coup in Niger, announcing a 7-day ultimatum to the military junta to reinstate Mohamed Bazoum as the country's president. The group of 15 nations in West Africa has vowed to take all necessary measures to restore constitutional order in the Republic of Niger, and a meeting of the Chiefs of Defense Staff to further discuss military action against the junta.
ECOWAS leaders gathered at the Nigerian capital Abuja for their extraordinary meeting. The meeting extensively discussed the latest developments in the Republic of Niger that have been marked by an attempted overthrow by members of the Presidential Guard of the Constitutional Order in the Republic of Niger, and the illegal detention of the legitimate head of government of President Mohamed Bazoum, as well as members of his family and government. In the meeting, the leaders resolved to affirm that President Bazoum remains the legitimate elected president and head of the state of the Republic of Niger, recognized by ECOWAS, the African Union, and the international community. They also resolved to condemn in the strongest terms the attempted overthrow of constitutional order in Niger and the illegal detention of President Bazoum.
The following measures are to be applied with immediate effect. 1. Closure of land and air borders between ECOWAS countries and Niger. 2. Institution of ECOWAS no-fly zone on all commercial flights to and from Niger. Suspension of all commercial and financial transactions between ECOWAS member states and Niger. Freeze all service transactions, including energy transactions. Freeze assets of the Republic of Niger in ECOWAS central banks. Freeze of assets of the Niger state and the state enterprises and parastatals in commercial banks. Suspension of Niger from all financial assistance and transactions with all financial institutions, particularly EBID and BOAD.
I want us to be strong, forceful, and resolute about the survivor of Bazoum, as well as the freedom and restoration of the constitutionally elected body in the Niger Republic.
The ECOWAS meeting held as thousands of supporters of the military coup in Niger marched through the capital, Niamey, on Sunday. Many chanted slogans in support of the military leadership, despite condemnation from regional powers, former colonial masters France, and the rest of the world.
Mes chers compatriotes,
on Friday, head of Niger's presidential guard appeared on state television as president of a newly formed military council. He said the military had chosen to absorb power in light of deteriorating security situation and the poor economic conditions. He called on international partners who have all but universally condemned Bazoum's ouster to cooperate with them in the best interest of the country and the greater Sahel region.
D'une part, à la dégradation continue de la situation sécuritaire de notre pays.
Malgré les dispositions prises.
Later, the military warned in a broadcast that any foreign military intervention to reinstate President Bazoum will result in a massacre and chaos.
Dans des chancelleries en collaboration avec ces dernières.
Bazoum's whereabouts remains unknown, but is believed to still be detained at the presidential palace. He has yet to formally give up power, and call for his reinstatement has been echoed by many foreign governments, including the United States, Russia, and the European Union. In the meantime, the UN says it is still delivering aid in Niger, but has not had any contact with the military following the coup.
I want to bring in African Affairs Analyst PoliticsToday. Thank you for joining me on the program, Mr. Chude.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Now, ECOWAS has announced sanctions on Niger's junta, closing ECOWAS borders against Niger, even though Niger's borders have already been shut against the rest of the world. What do you make of this move by the regional body?
Yeah, well, I think, it actually is a frustrating situation for ECOWAS right now. Obviously, this is the very first of perhaps many attempts that they will be making to bring some sanity to what is going on in Niger. So it's just a first, you could call it perhaps maybe a knee-jerk reaction because they have not engaged with the junta before even imposing the sanctions. So I think this is just the first of many steps that will be taken. But whether, again, you can begin to talk about the possibility of the effectiveness of this sanction dissuading the coupists or the military adventurers. Don't forget that in virtually all the West African countries where we have had sanctions, even after periods of engagement with the junta in those places, sanctions have been imposed, and often now they are still in power. So sanctions have limited applications and they have limited effectiveness. But I think it's just one step that has to be taken to show the displeasure of the sub-regional body towards what is going on in Niger. But obviously, like I said, this is just one of many things that might have to actions that might have to be undertaken against the junta. The sanctions will not go anywhere in deterring the coupists from what they have done, from discouraging them from what they have done. They will hold on to power.
Yes, but you don't think they would have an impact on Niger's economy or perhaps on the people itself, because Nigeria also shares borders with Niger, and I know that if those borders are shut, a lot of commerce that goes on between both sides will be affected.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about, I agree with you, it's going to have very severe impact. I mean, we have seen what the closure of borders, by Nigeria does to other West African countries because of the size of Nigeria's economy, because of the size of Nigeria as a whole. We have seen that the effect it has, even with countries that are not exactly adjoining our borders. I'm talking about Ghana, obviously Benin, after, what you have in Cotonou. So it's going to take an effect. But then you're talking about the ordinary people, and that can only be effective if the junta, the military junta, is concerned about the welfare or the interests of the Nigerian people. They are not interested. And, so it's always the same story about the same excuses that they give whenever they want to come in. They want to change the government. They want to have more responsible civilian government and governance and all that. So yes, it is always going to take a toll in every part of the world where sanctions have been undertaken, whether by the United Nations or other global regional bodies. It has always been the ordinary people that suffer the effects of the debilitating effect of these sanctions, and not the ruling class, because they have the access to the resources of the country, to the very little resources of the country, and they will prefer to fend for themselves first rather than the people. And of course, it would have political implication, because that would, as a way of putting pressure on the regime because of the anger of the people if they have to face very severe economic situations as a result of the sanctions.
Well, obviously, people are not seeing it that way. You do have some coup supporters who've been out on the streets, encouraging the junta to continue, and then warning against those who are opposing the coup in Niger. So that the coup does seem to have, some support. Well, why do you think that is? Because not much has been heard from Niger regarding the political or economic situation in the country, or how high-handed or how fraudulent the government may have been, which may have provided conditions for the coup to have taken place.
Yeah, well, for those who are supporting the coup, it's early days yet, because obviously, I doubt if anybody is going to feel the effect now. It's in the next few days, in the next few weeks, that the effect will begin to come in, and then the people will be faced with the reality of the consequences of the coup as a result of the sanctions that have been imposed on them. So at that moment, you want to see how many people will continue to remain adamant with regards to the support that they have for the military, junta. Of course, that is not to say that you will still not have people supporting them. But I can tell you, that when people begin to feel the pinch, they are going to look for those that are responsible. But beyond that, again, is the fact that, the basis of the coup, of some of the coups that have taken place in West Africa, have been led by the civilian governments. And so, and I think it is heartbreaking to see that after strenuous efforts to get the military to go back to the barracks, you now have a situation where the military has, tried to reinvent itself by, getting involved with the, national politics in a country like Niger and other West African countries. And it shouldn't be so, because the reason is that essentially the civilian government in this, and that's one thing that I think African political leadership should begin to lend credence to. They should begin, to concentrate on changing. They need to change the narrative. They need to change, this continuous cycle of bad governance in the West African, in Africa in general, especially the West African, subcontinent, that makes it easy for military adventurers, to get to power, to shoot themselves into power, and to begin to give reasons of misgovernance and the corruption and the instability as a reason for why they took over. And so African political leadership must be able to go beyond, this issue of just condemning military coups and ensuring that this time around they concentrate on having a good governance across the continent, to make it absolutely impossible for the military to want to shoot themselves into to power. I think it's a tragedy. We saw what is happening now in Sudan and in Guinea. When the military junta took over in Guinea, we saw even civil society organizations also lauding and supporting the military junta. It's just for a period of time, because in the next few years, everybody is going to wonder why the military has any business in government, and they want to push them out. So we suffer from a lack of, memory. We seem to forget too soon. But that is not a justification for the bad governance that goes on in West Africa and in Africa as a whole.
Now, unfortunately, when the military does come in, the most difficult thing to determine is when they're leaving. And it's also difficult for them also to determine when they're leaving. We've seen a classic example is Mali, where ECOWAS is trying to negotiate its way through, even sending a special delegation led by former Nigerian President, Goodluck Jonathan, to engage with the Malian leaders. Eventually, they said they will determine their own future, they will determine their own constitution and so on. But if you notice, more recent coups have happened in Francophone West African countries, or Francophone countries in Africa. Do you think there's a particular message here, even though the junta does say that this is not targeted against France? It has nothing to do with colonial masters.
Well, they might say so. But I think the coincidences are just too much. Obviously, if you look at the engagement of African countries with their former colonial masters, I think that of France has been the most toxic. Obviously, France has a completely different arrangement. The historical, the level or the kind of pattern of colonialism between France and the colonized states was absolutely different. Of course, we know the policy of assimilation and all that. And so I think in a way it has rubbed off. And again, France's continuous economic engagement with, their colonial, former colonial, territories have been, like I said, exceedingly very toxic. And people, have believed that it is exceedingly unfair and much more debilitating than what we had, for instance, with the British and the Portuguese in Africa. And I think that this is, in a way, they can deny it all they want, but I think in a way, this is also a reaction, because you have seen what is happening in France, in Mali. They have kicked out the French troops that were there for whatever purposes, they say for protection and to keep stability in Mali, and then allowed some other actors like the Wagner Group to come into Mali. And so we're having this back and forth between some of these French-speaking West African countries and France.
We'll take a short break. My interview with Mr. Achike continues after. Stay with us. Welcome back, and now to the continuation of my interview with Mr. Achike. Now, no one knows the whereabouts of the Nigerian President, Mohamed Bazoum. He's thought to still be in the presidential palace. The ECOWAS, the junta itself has warned against intervention of regional and other foreign powers into the coup that has happened in the country. What do you think could happen to him? Because in a way, he's still kind of free. He's still allowed to be on social media, where he just a few days ago, I think a day after the coup itself, tweeted that democracy will win again, in Niger. But really, he can't go anywhere. His family can't go anywhere, but he's said to still be in good health. What do you think could be his fate?
Yeah, let me just say this. I think there will be some bit of nervousness on the part of the pushists, of the military adventurists. They are not, exactly completely relaxed about their situation. They have not exactly consolidated, because yes, some people are celebrating them, their incursion to political power in Niger, but others are also in opposition. And most importantly, the international community, being led by ECOWAS, is in opposition to the illegal takeover of power. And so they are not sitting pretty. And that's why for now, Bazoum is going to be very safe. I do not believe that anything will happen to him. They will look for a way to ease him out without, by ensuring that he's not hurt under any circumstance, because they are not exactly sure of what the dynamics will be if anything happens to him. If you consider what has happened in other countries where we have had military coups, whether in Mali, whether in Guinea, and other countries, they have always ensured that the person that they took over from violently, that nothing happens to that president, to the presidents of those countries, together with their key aides. And so I think he's going to be safe. But beyond that is the fact, like I said, they are not sitting very pretty. There's always a possibility they don't know what ECOWAS is going to do. ECOWAS just has to do something, because this has become like a virus that is moving from one place to the other, And the reason why it has grown is essentially because other people, other militaries in other West African countries have looked at the fact that others have done this and they have seemed to have gotten away with it. Why would they not be able to get away with it? So that has emboldened them until something drastic is done to teach, maybe to use maybe one of these nations as an example, like Niger. I'm afraid that we might not be able to stop what is happening.
Thank you for your thoughts, Mr. Chude. Really appreciate your analysis on the program today.
Thank you, Amarachi. It's been a pleasure.
The biggest takeaway from President Vladimir Putin's meeting with leaders from 17 African countries is the promise of free grain to 6 African nations and the assurance of aversion of another food crisis. Russia intends to ship up to 50,000 tons of grain aid to Burkina Faso, to Zimbabwe, Mali, Somalia, Eritrea, and the Central African Republic in the next 3 to 4 months. The Russian president also announced Russia would forgive $23 billion in African debt and increase financial assistance to support the continent's development, among others. Here's more on the meeting and even after. African leaders arrived to a warm reception in St. Petersburg, Russia, for the second Russia-Africa Forum, including leaders from Libya, the Republic of Congo, and Cameroon. It was an opportunity for President Vladimir Putin to hold center stage before leaders from an entire continent. Even the Burkina Faso interim president, Captain Ibrahim Traoré, was welcomed to the summit. Right out the gate, the Russian president announced some good news for African leaders, telling them he would give them tens of thousands of tons of grain within months, despite Western sanctions, which he said made it harder for Moscow to export its grain and fertilizers. Putin said Russia was expecting a record grain harvest this year and was ready to replace Ukrainian grain exports to Africa on both a commercial and aid basis, and honor what he said was Moscow's critical role in global food security. But the UN Secretary-General, Antonio Guterres, condemned what he called a handful of donations, which he said will not correct the dramatic impact of the end of a deal that had allowed the safe Black Sea export of Ukraine grain for the past year.
It is clear that when taking out of the market millions and millions of tons of grains, it is clear that, based on economic laws, that will lead to higher prices than the ones that would exist with the normal access of Ukrainian grains to international markets. And this increase of prices will be paid by everybody, everywhere, and namely by developing countries and by the vulnerable people in middle income and even developed countries.
The U.S. said Russia's withdrawal from the grain deal has sparked volatility in grain prices.
The Black Sea Initiative had resulted in more than 32 million tons of grain being exported to world markets. Russia's actions to take such a significant amount of food products off the world markets will exacerbate hunger in some of the hardest hit areas of the world, including Africa.
President Putin also announced Russia's willingness to work with African leaders on their finances and to use regional currencies for trade payments. He told leaders Russia is interested in strengthening multifaceted ties with all regional economic integration associations and structures operating on the continent. Russia, he says, is in favor of establishing cooperation between the Eurasian Economic Union as the latest integration project in which Russia participates and the African Continental Free Trade Area formed within the framework of the African Union. The meeting then gradually veered into the war in Ukraine. African Union Chair Azali Assoumani appealed for peaceful coexistence between Russia and Ukraine, telling leaders, "I have no choice but to notice today that with the Russia-Ukraine crisis, the future of this partnership will be under threat should the crisis persist. Therefore, we need to find a resolution to the crisis in order to try to save thousands of people who depend on these imports." President Putin told African leaders on Friday Moscow respected their peace proposal in Ukraine and was carefully studying it. African leaders presented their peace initiative last month to both Putin and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, but he has failed to gain traction with either side. Putin initially agreed to it by reciting a list of Russian grievances against Ukraine and the West, while Zelensky has rejected the idea of a ceasefire that would leave Russia in control of nearly a fifth of Ukraine and give Russian forces time to regroup. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa, who led the delegation to Russia and Ukraine last month, said he hoped constructive engagement and negotiation can bring about an end to the conflict between both countries.
As South Africa, we are steadfast in our position that negotiation and dialogue and adherence to the United Nations Charter are necessary for the peaceful and just resolution of conflicts. It is our hope that constructive engagement and negotiation can bring about an end to the ongoing conflict between the Russian Federation and Ukraine.
By Saturday, the Russian president said he did not reject talks on Ukraine and that an African peace initiative as well as a Chinese one could be a basis for peace. This is where we end the program this week. Don't forget you can watch this episode and others that you may have missed on youtube.com/channelsweb. Just go to the playlist and search for Diplomatic Channel. I'm Amarachi Ubani. Until we meet again, take care for now.